So I want to start by telling you a story, one of my big lessons I learned early on. And like a lot of lessons we have in life, they don't come to us when we're, flying high, everything's great. They actually come to us when we're at our lowest. And that's where I want to start, with me sat in a hotel room in Rio de Janeiro, having just finished the first long leg of the Clipper race, feeling like I'd blown it. Feeling like I'd absolutely blown it, like I'd already failed. One leg into this, the biggest ambition, the greatest thing I'd ever tried, attempted to do, and I'd blown it. Now, we'd sailed from the UK, we'd sailed down the Atlantic to Rio, and we had a great result. We arrived in port in second place out of 10, so we were delighted with the metrics, with the result. But, I hadn't led that team in the right way. Not at all. I had been absolutely, this is what happens to a lot of young leaders. You're given your first bit of power and suddenly you become obsessed with the outcomes, obsessed with the metrics. That's what happened to me. I became absolutely fixated on these 6-hourly position reports, driving the crew to perform harder and harder and harder, coming down on them harshly when they didn't. The communication was all one way. There was no support, no coaching, not much active listening, it was not a good environment that we had on board. And the worst part was that the crew were taking their lead from me and starting to speak to each other in that same kind of way. So this environment we had on board, whilst high performing, was not one that was going to be sustainable for the 10 months going around the world. So one of the things we did in every stopover, we agreed this up front, that we would have a one-to-one meeting. I would have a one-to-one meeting with every single one of the crew. So they all sat before me on this one day, one after the other. Every single one of them expressed disappointment in the way I'd led the team. Almost all of them said they felt a level of regret about being assigned to my particular boat. But I think the thing that probably affected me the worst, or that impacted me the hardest, was when people said they felt there was no trust, or there was minimal trust on board. There wasn't a lot of trust in me as a leader. There wasn't a lot of trust in each other as teammates. And that wouldn't do, because this was the first leg of the race. This was where we needed to be building that support and building that confidence and building that trust. But the environment that we had, and the environment that I'd really played a leading role in creating, it was entirely task-focused. It was just a bit too win at all costs, and it was quite shouty and negative, and that had to change. So I had this feedback all in one day, and I went to my hotel room, and again, just feeling like I'd blown it. And all those self-doubts and limiting beliefs that we all carry around with us started crowding back in. I felt like maybe I really was too young for this job, feeling like I really was out of my depth, like some people had said. But after a night of beating myself up, I decided I wasn't going to leave, I wasn't going to quit. I had to turn things around, and I had to turn them around fast. So I had to, in my mind, make that shift to becoming a different type of skipper, reconnecting with the type of skipper that I had talked about being before the race, in all our team building and lead up to it, before the pressure of the racing came on. But I also had this really practical problem to solve, this trust thing. And I had to solve it quickly, because the third leg of this race was going to take us from Cape Town to Western Australia through the dangerous Southern Ocean, one of the most treacherous bodies of water anywhere in the world. And by the time we got there, we needed that trust level to be, as high as it could be. So we only had the next leg to sort this out, about 18 days. So naively, you won't believe this, I went onto Google, as we do in this day and age, and I typed in, how do you rebuild trust really quickly, right? It's an interesting search if you ever want to do it, with a lot of different answers, shall we say, occupying different spaces on the ethical spectrum. But once you scroll past all the clickbait, you start seeing the same thing again and again and again. Something called the trust equation. Have you heard of it? Some have. The trust equation is brilliant. It's super simple, which is, made me quite attracted to it. And it goes like this. Trust, or trustworthiness in the case of an organization, equals credibility. So credibility, obviously, this room just exudes credibility. In the recruitment sector, you are all absolutely credible, authoritative, believable people. Now, I don't think I had a problem with credibility. The crew genuinely seemed to trust my ability to keep them safe, to navigate the yacht and do all the sort of racing tactics, navigation stuff. But where I had a problem was the next part, which was reliability. So reliability is how well and how dependably and how reliably those words get turned into actions. And this is where I had a problem, because I had talked a brilliant leadership game before the race. You would have been so proud of me in a room, not quite as grand as this one, with flip charts all over the walls. We were coming up with our vision, mission, values, acceptable, unacceptable behaviors, all this great stuff, right? And then we'd gone to sea, the pressure had come on, and it had all gone out the window. So I'd said one thing, I promised I was going to be one thing, and I was delivering something very different. And the crew quite rightly saw me as a hypocrite. And the final part of the top line of the trust equation is intimacy. And intimacy is just a bond. As you get to know someone else, you reveal more about yourself, they reveal more about themselves, and a meaningful connection grows from that. The fact that most large businesses have people called key account managers, in fact, you're probably responsible for hiring many of these type of people, just speaks to the need for having that bond of intimacy in building trust with those key stakeholder clients. So you probably could have guessed that, the trust equation. Those are the things you need to have trust in someone, but this is where it gets interesting, because all those things are mathematically divided by something else, self-orientation. And self-orientation has to do with someone's focus, and whether that focus is inwards, and you get the impression that someone is just serving their own needs, serving their own agenda, or whether it's turned outwards onto other people, and they're sort of doing the best for others, and by doing that, they will get the rewards that they're after as well. Now, this was a perceptual issue that I had, because I'm sure that my crew were sat around the bar in Rio, sinking caipirinhas, saying to each other, do you know what? Brendan sent out all these surveys and stuff before the race. He seemed to be interested in what we wanted, but actually, he doesn't care about that. He just wants to win this thing, because that's what's going to further his own, career and his own agenda. And I had to change that and make sure that the crew felt that my self-orientation was towards them, and by me doing the best for them, I would also get, the result that I wanted. I've got a great example of this. I really want to share this with you. I was speaking at an event last year. It was a new MD of sales, stood up in front of a new sales team, trying to build trust, and he said, you know why 2017 is going to be a great year? Hush silence. Because this is the year I'm getting my boat. He was mad keen sailor, which is why I was there, and I was off at the side of the stage, and I just went, oh my God, you did not just say that. Imagine that. That's the first impression people get of this incredible self-orientation. So he might have been doing that stuff up the top brilliantly, but he was going to be having an uphill battle to overcome that impression that he gave. And that's the thing that struck me about the trust equation, was that self-orientation is expressed as a mathematical divider. So all that stuff at the top can be wiped out or hugely minimized if people get the impression that you're just in it for your own goals, your own needs, serving your own agenda. So I took the trust equation, I actually printed it out, and I took it to our crew meeting that we had before our next leg of the race to Cape Town. I put it out on the table, we discussed it, I told the crew of I was going to take their feedback on board, I wanted them to hold me accountable, and I was going to be a very different skipper from now on, which they seemed very glad to hear. And so I said to them, as well as the trust equation, what else do we need on board this boat to feel this high sense of trust that we need? And it became a very wide-ranging conversation. And 3 key things dropped out of it. The first was that the crew wanted me to spend more time teaching them. They wanted me to spend more of my time actively dedicated to upskilling them, sharing my knowledge, and making sure that they were developing as individuals. The second was that they wanted to be more empowered. They wanted to take control of the things they could safely take control of. And they wanted to understand our strategy. Because the way we've been operating on that first leg was they just needed to know what was coming in the next 6 hours, and that was all I told them. But they wanted to know what change and uncertainty was coming in the next 24, 48-hour periods. So from that, 3 things that became part of our campaign came from that. The first was a culture of coaching, which began as a simple buddy system, but evolved into a very comprehensive framework of how we would develop people. The second was, a recommitment from me to empower people as much as possible within the bounds of safety, something we talked about before the race, hadn't done so well. And finally was a daily meeting, which we would have every single day without fail from then on, where I would make sure that the crew understood what change was coming, what the next 48 hours looked like, and what our strategy was to overcome, the challenges that were facing us. So 3 things that became fundamental to our campaign.